Good morning, at Properties. It's Thursday, May 21st. I'm Amy Corr, and I'm joined by Kevin Van Eck, who's live out of our Goose Island office. We're excited to be back for another episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Hi, Amy. Good morning. Hopefully everyone has their coffee set. It's Thursday, and so that is the day where we take your questions and answer them. And so I want to encourage you, we love answering these questions, especially because if you're sending over a question, we know that other agents have the same one. So today we're going to answer a few of your questions here on Coffee with Amy and Kevin. But first, we heard yesterday in Illinois that Governor Pritzker announced that May 29th, we're going to start to reopen. So phase one of reopening, and you can find the details and articles online in terms of who it applies to and what businesses are affected. And I'm sure many of you are super excited about patios being open so we can enjoy the nice weather that's coming. But the questions that we're getting surround open houses and tenant-occupied properties. And right now, unfortunately, we don't have any detail about that. I'm sure it will be coming out. I'm sure that they will be putting out more information about how it affects us specifically as an industry and if those two things are changing. So just trust that when we hear it, we will definitely share and put that out to you so you understand how to operate your business. So to kick off the questions, I've got a question for you, Amy. The first one that we received that we're going to cover today really surrounds service and what we've been talking about the past week, and specifically about process. So the question we got is, you know, if a listing is lingering or if something in the transaction outside of our control throws off our process, how do we get it back on track? How do we get our clients and ensure that our clients continue to be engaged with us?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think that it happens a lot. You know, I think when we sit down with a seller and we outline what our game plan is, we're all in agreement on price, you know, what we think the market is going to do, how it's going to react to the listing. And so we're all sort of on the same page. We're all hugely optimistic. And then we put the listing live. And then sometimes things happen that we don't think are going to. You know, I just was talking to an agent who thought that they would put on a listing and they would get a ton of activity in the first 7 days and they got nothing. And so, you know, everybody kind of goes into that panic mode. And I think what the thing that is so important for us as brokers to always keep in mind is, you know, at the beginning of the process, when you kick it off, that's when they love you the most, aside from when you create success and you're at the closing table with them. But there's a whole lot that goes on in between. And so communication is critical, but not just, you know, sending texts or email messages on occasion. I think it's like, you know, voice to voice is extremely important. And I know face to face is a little bit harder right now, but there are critical times where you need to make sure you can hear how your clients are feeling through the entire process. So, you know, to your question, Kevin, if things aren't going really well, we set up a game plan. Now we have to make a shift. We've got to pivot, essentially. Is it the seller's job to ask you, hey, Amy, is it time to pivot? Absolutely not, because if they're coming to you with their concerns, then you haven't done your job. So the most critical thing we have to do as agents is make sure that we stay one step ahead of the client. If you're feeling concerned that things aren't going well or the market is not reacting well to the listing, guess what? They're thinking the same exact thing. They're just too afraid at this point to maybe verbalize it to you. But what you don't want to have happen is where you don't take the bull by the horns, decide to have a regroup meeting and say, listen, you know, you want to make sure that you can handle that, because if they're suddenly asking you to have a sit down or have a conversation about repositioning, it's too late. So the most important thing you have to think about as a broker through the entire process is, am I staying one step ahead? And am I communicating really well to them to make sure that they know what's going to happen in the event something doesn't go as planned? And if we do need to make a shift. So, you know, one of the scripts I like to use is to call the seller and say, listen, Bob and Sally, when are you guys available? Because I'd love to have a phone call or a face-to-face meeting or a Zoom, because I want to talk about the market. You know, we anticipated that we were going to come on and we would get a lot of activity. That isn't happening, and I'm not happy. So the key is for you to say, I'm not happy with how we're performing right now, and I want to sit down and come up with a strategy for us to readjust so that we can create success. The thing that you're doing, it's so important, is you're taking control and you're guiding them through that adjustment. And here's the thing, you can do this at any point in time. So let's say, you know, you're sitting there and you're thinking, God, but I haven't done a really good job and it's been 120 days in and I haven't really communicated. you can use that script at any point in time. You can pick up the phone and you can say, listen, I've been taking a look at the market. I've looked at what's gone under contract, and I've looked at what's coming on as well. And I think we need to have a critical conversation right now, because I'm not happy with where we're positioned, and I know what we can do to create success for you. The minute you have that dialogue and you use those words to take control, you're taking power back. They're gaining confidence in you, and you can immediately readjust the tone or the temperature that you might be feeling right now in that relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. I think the biggest thing that come out of that is the being proactive, right? If you sit back and you know that things are going off the rails and they're not engaged with you, addressing it before they do, the most important part, right?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, I always say you have to be one step in front of your client, because if you've been doing this long enough, or you've ever been in a position where you are working with a salesperson, you know what it feels like to be the client or the consumer. So know that, anticipate it, and just get out in front of it and be comfortable addressing what you need to address.
Cool.
So Kevin, next question that came in was, if there was one thing you could do for a buyer or seller to create a great experience, because I know this week has really been focused on process, but also creating the extreme client experience. We got a question from someone who asked, what would it be if you were creating a great experience for a buyer or seller? What would you do?
That's a great question. I think we threw out a lot of ideas, and I want to start with this question. I want to start answering with the part to reiterate that it's not something like creating this great experience does not have to cost thousands of dollars, right? You can create great experiences with a very small budget. You just need to find things that are impactful and possibly personal, things that are unexpected, because those are the best. It's not necessarily always the amount of money that's spent, whether it's on gifts or an experience or something like that. So I want to point that out, because not everybody has the ability to, put people up at the peninsula for a weekend. So in terms of this, if I had a buyer or seller, and I'm going to include a referral source here as well, I always think about front loading. And so if you think about it, it's almost like when I'm going to relate it going to a crowded bar or hiring movers sometimes. When you tip in advance, you almost guarantee that you're going to have a good experience. You are going to front load by tipping them early. Ensure that they are going to take care of you. And it's almost the same thing here. When I think about clients and referral sources, creating a great experience at the very first moment so that it starts at a peak. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, the moment you start working with a buyer, right after the buyer presentation, or the moment after a listing presentation, that's when you have the ability to create a huge impact, because they've just met you. It's at the beginning. And essentially what you're doing is two things. One is, they're still within the first, range of experience with you. So you're really setting the bar high, and you need to continue to live up to that. But I also think it creates a little bit of guilt in the client. And what I mean by that is, one of the questions or the question that Amy just answered in terms of maybe something in the transaction happening, if you started off with this client at a high, as there are little bumps in the road, they will probably be a little bit more lenient if you miss a call. If something, unfortunately, we know things happen and outside of our control. If you started off on a high, they're more likely to be lenient as you move forward. And talking about referral sources, we want to reward the behavior as soon as possible. A lot of times we wait until maybe a client closes, the referral closes, and then we send a gift to the referral source. It's too late at that point for two reasons. One is we want to reward the behavior up front when it happens. So when someone says our name or they make an introduction, we want to reward it right then. The second thing is, how many referrals do we get that end up not closing? And if we're always waiting to reward behavior until something closes, we're actually missing, a huge percentage of the number of referrals that we've received. And so rewarding up front, even though one referral may not close, that doesn't mean that that person isn't going to continue to refer you to people that will end up transacting with you. So I think front loading is the answer. I would always start the experience at a high, because at the end, when they purchase a new property, when they've sold their new property, they're riding high already because you've created success for them. So start the relationship off with a bang.
Yeah, I think that that's super important. And, the one thing too is I think when we were talking this week and we were talking about service, the extreme client experience, and I think our examples were pretty cool and pretty high end, black car, flowers. But here's the thing for people to really remember. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's more important for it to be thoughtful. And so when you're thinking about an extreme client experience, what is so critical is when you're first doing initial intake with a client, really listen to the things that are important to them, listen to, things that might be special to them that to a different client wouldn't really matter. It doesn't always equate to dollars. It's more about the specialness and the way that you make them feel valued, where it's like, wow, I didn't realize that Kevin picked up that we really like this restaurant down the street. And it might be like a to-go joint that, gives, is just a pizza place. But if he, sends them dinner from that place one night because it's their favorite place, that goes a long way. It might have cost him $25-30 to feed the family. So again, I want to be conscious of that, because I think some of the feedback was, if I'm a newer broker, I may not, have all of these dollars to spend on these extreme experiences. It isn't always the dollar. It's more the intention and the thoughtfulness behind it. So important to remember that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things that you can do, and I did this, I had an intake form anytime I started working with a seller or buyer. And on that was their favorite movies, their favorite books, their favorite restaurants, hobbies. And I would ask them these questions when I started working with them, and then use that to craft experiences down the road. And one thing, Amy, as you were talking, one of the things I thought about now, if I knew what people's favorite movies were or favorite TV shows, Cameo is something super cool. You could send them a message from someone from their favorite show. So last question for you. And this one kind of ties back into the first one, but with a twist. How do you recover if we know we weren't doing a great job during a transaction? And so if I could rephrase this, in this scenario, we kind of know, and I'm reading into what the broker said to us, if you know you haven't been doing a great job, if you know you've missed the mark, how do you recover from that?
Yeah, you just never call them again. No, I'm kidding. No, it's tough. I mean, we've all been there. Every single one of us. Kevin and I were talking, earlier before filming about, how we've kind of blown it with a client sometimes. We have the best of intentions, but maybe we just get too busy, because we do have a lot of clients that we're juggling and we don't pay enough attention. Or, it's just been a really big challenge. It's been a difficult property to sell, and, it's been hard. And so sometimes our reaction as brokers is that we kind of want to avoid the challenge. And so we do nothing, or we don't give them as much energy as we should. And then the problem becomes bigger. But here's the thing, and this is what I had to learn the hard way, is that, if you lose that client, there are a lot of, relationships tied to them and opportunities tied to them that you may lose as well. And the thing is you may lose the relationship. Sometimes it's so far down the road, or it's kind of beyond recovery. But I would say you always have to give it your best shot. And it's kind of back to what we've been saying in the last two conversations, is you've got to get out in front of it. Kevin referred to front loading and doing things at the very beginning to make sure that the experience is great. We talked about it even with, listings, and making sure that you're one step ahead of the client. That the relationship is damaged. You can tell by the emails that you're getting from them, the phone conversations. What I would tell you is you're the professional. You know the process, but you also know when it's time to just own it. And so what I would do is I would pick up the phone and I would just have a really authentic conversation with that client. And I would also fall on my sword. Like, if I wasn't doing a great job, I would say it. And I would say, listen, I recognize that this hasn't been the smoothest process, that I think I could have been doing a better job communicating some of the things that you should be expecting and what we might see in the market. So own the issue, own their frustration, lean into it, and let them vent. If they get frustrated, give them the opportunity, let them have their voice. That is critical, you guys. You have to let them, if they're angry, whatever it is, let them hash it out, because they need to get that out in order for you to see if there's an opportunity to recover. And once they do, then you say, listen, I'm really sorry, and I understand your frustration. Here's what I'd like to do moving forward. That's your critical phase. or phrase, because what you're doing is you've recognized the problem, you've addressed it, you've owned it, but now you have to be the individual who they hired, who then takes it and decides how you're going to move the process forward. So here's what I'd like to do now. That's critical. So, we've all been there. Sometimes you might lose the relationship. Here's the other thing. If you do, and it's a super bummer, allow yourself to be upset about it. I'll give you an hour and a half. But then you've got to move on. You've made a mistake. We've all done it. You didn't do as good of a job as you knew you could. Learn from it. Recognize, why did that fall through the cracks? Why didn't I want to embrace them? And maybe it's a learning lesson of, you just didn't really like that client's personality and it wasn't a good mesh for you. This is a learning opportunity for you and your business to also say, you know what? Next time, I'm going to do a better job of recognizing the client's personality and make sure, is this business I want to take on? Because it might have been a strain on you, and that might have been also why you weren't giving it your best. You weren't really wanting to follow up with them. So, take the challenges, take the failures, and learn from those, because those are really what are going to make you become stronger in your business moving forward. But, ultimately, remember, you're the professional. You're the one that is responsible for guiding them through the process. If there's a bump in the road, if there's challenging dialogues, if there's elephants in the room, you've got to address them, you've got to present them, you've got to own them. And they'll appreciate that. Even if you end up going separate ways, they will still respect you for taking ownership of that dialogue and figuring out how best to move on.
Yeah, really great advice. And I especially love the part, I think one of the things through life, certainly, but in real estate, specifically, learning from what's happened, right? Instead of continuing on and either allowing the same mistakes to happen or putting ourselves in the same position where those things can happen. So I really love that. Hopefully these questions were ones that you had and you found them helpful. So thank you for watching us today. We're going to be back tomorrow morning with another episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin. And as you can see, as the one side of my face has disappeared, the sun is out. So it's a beautiful day. And thanks, Amy. Another good morning.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Make it a great Thursday. I think the sun is coming out, as Kevin said. And so hopefully you can get out and get some fresh air today. But thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you tomorrow.